This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hi, my name is Madison.
I'm Hannah.
And you are listening to Who's Knocking?
A true crime podcast.
Yeah. So we're back. This is episode 46. Can you believe that we've done 46 episodes? Well, we will have done after this.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think for like 50, we should have a little celebration.
Okay, I'm down. Something special.
I don't know what, but something cool. I don't know. We'll think about it.
Okay.
Did you listen to last week's episode?
Yes.
And you knew about it because I did mention this was the second episode we'd ever done, and it just like was kind of shitty. So that's why I was like, oh, I was trying to like come up with things to do a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh yeah, the script is like done. And I went through and like edited it a little and whatever. And yeah, what are your thoughts
on who did it, or just in general?
Any specifically who did it, but also I don't know. I guess the whole thing.
Well, there's no fucking way I would move into that house. Absolutely not. That is terrifying.
And I guessed in the episode, I was like, I think if Hannah got one of those letters, she would like be very scared. Was I correct in that?
Yes.
That assumption?
I'm pretty easily scared. So like, but they were too. They never moved.
Yeah, no, they were terrified.
I don't think it would have been them, because didn't they lose a lot of money, like selling the house and renovating and everything, right?
Yes.
So what would possibly be their motivation to do that?
Well, the only factor, so one, I think it's possible, but I still don't buy this, that they thought that they could make money from it, like with media attention. But even if that was the case, like they seemed really reluctant with the media attention to me, and like they've, they actively do not want their children, like any pictures of the kids, their faces are blurred out. They don't mention the kids' names anywhere. They clearly took time to get the children's identities out of the letters that have been made public.
Right.
So that's where I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like
why?
If you were the type of people who really wanted media attention and whatever, like there's a lot of people who are like totally cool to like throw their kids into stuff like that and like whatever. So like that doesn't jive.
Yeah. They weren't stage moms.
There has been a Netflix deal for the story, but I don't know how much of it is
to them,
goes to them, because I know that the Netflix deal, I don't know. I have to assume some of it. But I don't know, because I think a lot of it was like based off of that one huge article, and that's like, I don't know if that writer or it's like the New Yorker has rights to the story. I don't know who had the rights to the story, but the Netflix bought the rights to the story. I have to assume the family got something, but I don't know. And that was never a guarantee. So I don't know, but I just don't think personally. I watched someone else's video who like went through the whole thing and tried to decide what they thought it could be. And they thought that to them, it seemed like the most likely idea that it was them, but only because there's no evidence to point to anyone else.
Right.
It's like either it's them or it's someone else. And it's like, okay, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So maybe it was, I don't know. I just didn't think it would have been. And you're right that like the Netflix, like I know you had mentioned that, but I guess I didn't really take that part in, because I know they had sold the house at a loss, or they'd spent the money renovating and all of that. So
they lost a lot of money.
Short term, they had lost a lot of money. Yeah, it's like, it's such a gamble to think that you'd get media attention. You know what I mean?
And such a random thing, like, because it really did seem like they wanted to like buy a house and like live there. Like they have 3 kids, like their kids are just living in limbo until, plus they really wanted to stay in the neighborhood. And I just don't feel like if you're doing it just for like shits, did you like, why are you like remaining in the neighborhood? Like, do you really, it just doesn't make sense. So that's why I don't see enough evidence to point it at them, besides the fact that at the end he started like actually sending letters. But
yeah, but and also, well, allegedly the people before had also gotten letters.
Yeah. Well, like they got one letter.
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know. I'm interested in, if anyone else has really real reason to believe that they did it. I would love to know that.
I mean, that would be kind of nice. Like I would almost rather that be the truth because it's like
be the
less
least creepy. Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't mind that, I guess.
But anyway, we can leave the intro at that. Also, send us a shout if you have a really good idea for a 50th episode.
Yeah. Charles Manson.
People. Yeah, it could be something like super popular. I've started working on the one for after this, and I'm doing another popular one after this. But
are you gonna tell us who, or surprise?
I'll tell you, but I'm not gonna tell the audience.
Okay, tell me after.
Okay.
Yeah, like part of me, I mean, Charles Manson is like a super famous case, but there's so much controversy about what actually happened. So
yeah, I feel like I'd need like 3 weeks to do that.
It's just like you can't know what actually happened too. There's so much conflicting information. CIA, maybe
100th episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to read that book.
Chaos.
Yeah, Chaos. That's what it's called. Okay, so today's episode, this is kind of an interesting one. It is another local to us. It occurred in Toronto, and so it's like super local to me at least. And it's Unsolved. I've been really liking the Unsolved ones. I think it's like super creepy. Something about Unsolved is like really creepy to me. Yeah, I guess I'm not the only. That's not like an original idea.
Creepy. Well, except for the ones like Robert Wood, where you kind of know what happened.
Yeah, this one is really like you have no idea.
Okay.
And it is the unsolved murders of Barry and Honey Sherman.
I've kind of heard of this.
Yeah, this was big news here.
Yeah, actually, my friend, shout out Rachel. I don't know if she's listening, but I was on a hike with her, like a year ago, and she was saying that she was telling me about this.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff. And there's a lot of backstory. I read, where is it? I'm sitting really weirdly. So I got most of the info from this book. Okay. For those just listening, it's called The Billionaire Murders: The Mysterious Deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman. And it's written by Kevin Donovan, who is a journalist for the Toronto Star, which comes up a lot in here. And the Toronto Star is one of the top newspapers in Toronto. And yeah, I did a lot of research elsewhere, but a lot from this book. So if you're ready, I will get right into it. Okay, so the date is Friday, December 15th, 2017. It was a cold winter morning at 50 Old Colony Road, a big mansion in a wealthy area of North York, Toronto.
Ooh, which area?
It's
my parents lived in North York.
North York. Let me see where exactly.
Also, we went to school in North York.
Yes, it's like.
So what if it was nearby there? Although we weren't in school at that time, but.
Were we done? Yeah, it's.
Otherwise, we would have definitely heard of it.
Bayview and York Mills.
Okay, that's like really close to where my parents live.
Yeah, like pretty north of York Mills. Like in between York Mills and Shepherd.
That's like right where my parents live.
Yeah, you were.
They're north of. Okay, I shouldn't be like saying where my parents live.
Yeah, you were.
But in that vicinity.
Yeah, in the general area for sure. Yeah, because I see the IKEA. It's close.
Oh my god! Ooh, so creepy.
So yeah, it's there. The house belonged to Bernard and Honey Sherman. The 6-bedroom home had recently been put on the market for $6.9 million.
Wow.
That morning at 8:30 a.m., the housekeeper and the woman who was responsible for watering the plants both arrived and got to work. Sorry, this is on a stand.
I like how there's somebody who's solely responsible for just watering plants.
Yes, that's her job. She comes in once a week, and I guess there's enough. And she's there for like a while. Like if you came into my place and
you
watered
can't
plants,
just get like somebody else to do that.
If you came into my place and watered my plants, it would take you 2 minutes. But she's here for hours. So
how many plants do they have?
I don't know. Like, so I'm saying she comes at 8:30. And okay, so they both arrived, and then the cleaner noticed that the couple's bed looked like it had not been slept in, which was unusual. And they also found an iPhone on the floor in the powder room, which was random. And other than that, it was business as usual. Then at 10 a.m., the lady's still there. It's an hour and a half. She's still watering plants.
What's she doing there?
She's watering plants.
Also, this is literally like a 5-minute drive from my parents' house. I'm looking it up.
I want to drive by.
Okay.
Okay, so at about 10 a.m., Elise Stern arrived at the house. Elise was one of 2 real estate agents working on the sale of the home. Elise was a close friend of Honey's sister, Mary Schechtman. The other agent was Judy Gottlieb, who was a close friend of the Shermans, and Judy was out of town at the time on vacation, so Elise was doing all the showings. And the 2 ladies are still there. Elise arrived to show the house to an interested couple from mainland China and their real estate agent. Elise was a little bit weary coming over. She was pretty sure that it would be okay, but she had tried to get in touch with the Shermans earlier that morning to confirm the showing, and she hadn't heard back. So she was just like, okay, I'll just go for it, and I'm sure it'll be fine. Then Elise started upstairs with the clients, showing them everything upstairs, and she worked her way down and ended up in the basement. In the basement was a huge, it was a very big basement. It extended back underneath the tennis courts of the backyard, and she led the couple into the pool room. There's a lap pool in the basement. She noticed before going in that there were some papers on the floor. She picked them up. They were inspection papers for the home. She thought it was odd that they were just lying on the floor, but she just picked it up and continued on with the tour. She pressed the red safety button, which opened up the magnetic door to the pool room, and she stopped suddenly and quickly closed the door after she took a look inside. She told the clients that the homeowners were doing yoga in there and that she quickly had to get everybody back upstairs.
Oh, God.
The buyers were not impressed with the situation, and they did not appreciate being rushed out. But Elise had just seen something that would haunt her forever.
Yeah, what was it?
I'll get there.
Okay.
So once the buyers left, Elise rounded up the 2 women working in the home. She asked the cleaning lady to go take a look in the pool room, which was fucking rude. Like, she saw what was in the pool room, and then she's like, you go take a look. Like,
that's weird.
That's mean. The cleaning lady,
but it's like, wouldn't you like say something?
And I don't, that's just, like, this is how it described it in the book.
Okay.
It just said like she asked her to go look downstairs. So I would like to hear from the cleaning lady. Like, did she say what she saw? Because if not, that's shitty as fuck, lady.
That's really shitty. Like, you're literally traumatizing somebody for life, I'm assuming.
Yeah, just like, she's like, oh, well, I'm already traumatized. Like, rude.
And I'll just traumatize you now too.
So the cleaning lady went downstairs, and she came back up visibly shaken, which is why I think she had no idea what she was going to do.
I mean, okay.
Then she said, quote, call the police, end quote. But Elise did not call the police. First, she called her friend Mary.
Dude, what's up with Elise?
Mary told her to call the police. First, she called Mary, and Mary told her to call the police. Okay. Then she started calling the Shermans' children, starting with Jonathan Sherman, who is the only son of the Shermans. Finally, after 90 minutes at 11:43 a.m., she called the police. What the hell, Elise?
Why did it take her so long?
Yeah, it was 90 minutes. The Shermans.
So weird. Madison, what was she doing and why?
I don't know. I think it's suspicious.
It's weird.
Like, why? Like, just call, especially when I tell you what she fucking found.
Well, I can imagine what she found. Like, I know this podcast. I know what it's about.
Yeah. So I'll tell you. So the police arrived, and the paramedics arrived first, and the Shermans were found in their basement pool room, both deceased and in a rather odd position. Barry was found in a seated position, legs outstretched, right leg crossed over the left, his back to the pool. He was wearing glasses and a bomber jacket that was pulled slightly off of his shoulders and down, which held his arms at his side. Next to him was his wife, Honey, in a similar position. The jacket she was wearing was also pulled off her shoulders, holding her arms to her side. Both Honey and Barry had men's leather belts around their necks and tied to a 3-foot-high stainless steel railing above their heads. Both were fully dressed. Yeah, it's like such an ominous position.
Yeah.
Barry's face appeared to be untouched and Honey's showed signs of damage. The paramedics pronounced them VSA, which is vital signs absent, which to me kind of sounds like dead on arrival, which I don't know if there's a difference.
Yeah, why not just say that? But
okay. Maybe it's like a Canadian American thing. I'm not sure. They also trampled through the crime scene, ready to attempt to save some lives, but unfortunately disturbing possible evidence.
Okay.
It appeared that rigor mortis had already come and gone, and that the paramedics guessed that they had been dead for at least a day, probably more. Word started to travel among Barry and Honey's friends and family. I guess Elise started that. And everyone was shocked and horrified, especially as details began to emerge that made it look like a homicide.
I mean, what else could it be?
Exactly. Now, it was about 4 p.m. when the news of the couple's deaths made it to the Toronto media. The home was sealed off and CSI began to arrive. Constable David Hopkinson came out and made the first statement. And he said, quote, "The circumstances of their death appear suspicious, and we are treating it that way." End quote.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, obvious. He said that the police were inside taking apart the scene and that anyone with information was invited to contact the police. Now,
okay.
A few hours later, Brandon Price, a detective from the Toronto Homicide Squad, came out and said that the detectives had found no sign of forced entry and that they were not currently looking for any suspects.
Oh.
So that is like a bold thing to say. Like, they're not looking for any suspects, and makes you assume that they have someone in mind,
yeah,
or that, it wasn't a homicide.
But it must have been, right? Like, there's no. Did they say cause of death or no?
Well, we'll get into the autopsies and stuff, but
okay.
This will become a little bit more relevant as I go through things. Now, around that time also, a woman who lived across the street approached the police, and she told them that she had a security camera on her home, but it also pointed at the Sherman house.
Ooh, okay.
And she said that she and her husband had looked at the tape and noticed something. Mm-hmm. And the officer said that they would send someone over. And then 2 days later, the couple still had not heard anything. And the couple knew they had, the way it was set up, it was like it would record for 7 days and then erase. So they're like, hurry up, guys. Like,
yeah, we need to see it. What was the suspicious thing?
Again, we'll see a little bit later.
Okay.
But I will take you back now and talk about who Barry and Honey Sherman are.
All right, tell me.
So Barry Sherman was born February 25th, 1942 to Herbert and Sarah Sherman. They were born in Canada, both from Jewish parents who had escaped anti-Semitism in Poland and Russia. So they kind of got out right before or in and around World War II.
Yep.
Barry grew up in the Forest Hill neighborhood of Toronto, an affluent area with a large Jewish population. His father, Herbert, was the president of the American Trimming Company, which was a small firm that made zippers. Barry looked up to his father and was always eager to impress him. And one day when Barry was 10 years old, Herbert went to work and he never came home. He suffered from a massive heart attack at his office and died. The rest of the family later learned that Herbert had a congenital heart defect, which he had just never told them about because he didn't want to worry them.
Oh my God.
Like, that's
I have to say though, like, I feel like my family's kind of like that too.
Really? Well, yeah. I wonder, I only know the life that I lived or whatever. But you have to assume that, like, I don't know if it's like a cultural thing or like,
it's like a trauma thing, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, maybe. It's like, gotta pretend like everything's fine. But, or like, you don't want to like worry people, but yeah, that, or like if you talk about it, it'll be like worse. yeah, like my grandma had cancer and she's fine. Like, you know, she survived and everything, but she like wouldn't like tell anyone or get it looked at for so long. And it's like, probably should have done that. But I'm also kind of like that. I don't like going to doctors. But it's just like the not telling somebody to not worry them. It's like, hey man, just tell them.
Well,
Just tell them. They're your
I
family.
feel like and maybe it was because we were like younger or whatever, but like I remember, I think my mom might have had a cancer scare once a long time ago, and like we never heard about it till after. Although, you know, fair enough if you want to like figure it out first. And then I think my grandma also had cancer, and like we didn't find out till like way later, but we were also really young. So I don't know if it's just like the young kid thing.
That's true. If you're really young.
But like this guy didn't even tell his wife. His wife had no idea. Which is just like, dude.
Yeah. Just tell her.
Prepare them. Anyway, Barry grew up and he began to suffer from insomnia, which kept him up all night and resulted in him being super sluggish at school. Mm-hmm. He was often caught daydreaming in class, and teachers found him to be unresponsive. In grade 5, this earned him the nickname Grandpa. And in high school, both students and teachers began calling Barry Butterball. And I assume that this also came from his pudgy physique. Now, that sounds kind of mean to me, but Barry seemed to be pretty unfazed by these less than affectionate nicknames. And he kind of kept to himself for the most part. I think everybody kind of just thought not much of him. At home, things were very chaotic. His mom had started working as an occupational therapist, which was what she was doing before she started having kids. But then she also took in boarders to help support the family. And I think compared to a lot of the like 2-parent households where like there was stay-at-home moms, this was like kind of a lot. It's like definitely more normal now, but back then I think it was like a lot. Things did not seem to be going super well for Barry, but that was until his senior year when he met Joel Ulster.
Okay.
It was during his senior year that Barry learned about a contest in the Toronto Star. The newspaper ran a series of brain teasers and asked readers to mail in their answers every few days. Now, Barry thought that he and Joel could win, and they made it all the way to the tiebreaker and then lost. But Barry was convinced that they actually had won. Barry, unassuming as he was, had become very confident in his intellectual abilities, always positive that he was right. And to be fair, he usually was. And it was said that Barry most likely had a photographic memory. He was actually like super smart. Joel Ulster was also quite sharp. And that year, the two of them became total BFFs. A friendship began. Joel was much more social and athletic than Barry, but he recognized Barry's talents way before anyone else did. And in his senior year, Barry became very interested in math and science, and he entered a physics competition and took home first place.
Cool.
Barry would go on to spend a lot of time in the Ulster home, and he grew very close to Joel's father, Ben Ulster. Ben was a successful entrepreneur, owning a number of movie theaters in the city. Mm-hmm. Ben really liked Barry and instantly recognized his potential, and he became convinced that Barry would be very successful and probably go on to win a Nobel Peace Prize one day. The summer that Sherman turned 18, he began working for his uncle, Lou Winter. Lou was Barry's mother's younger brother, and Lou was known to have a pretty severe temper, but he liked Barry and the two got along very well. Lou was very successful and he had 4 sons. Paul was the oldest and he was adopted. He was 2 years old when Barry started working for Lou. And soon followed Jeffrey, Carrie, and then Dana, all biological sons. So Lou, he ran 2 companies. One was called Winter Laboratories, and it was a medical testing lab that ran pregnancy tests on urine samples that women dropped off at pharmacies. Obviously, this was before take-home pregnancy tests.
Yeah.
So that's kind of shitty that that's how that used to occur, because I've taken a number of pregnancy tests at this point in my life. And 2, the second one was called Empire Laboratories, and this was a distributor of generic prescription drugs purchased from American manufacturers.
Okay.
So generic drugs were kind of a new thing and a little bit controversial depending on who you ask. Big Pharma would refer to generic drug producers as pirates. They did not like other companies coming and stealing their intellectual property, and drastically undercutting prices, especially after all the research and development that went into creating these drugs. But on the other hand, the Canadian government was pretty into the idea because they were able to piggyback off of the far superior American drug innovation scene while paying a lot less for the fruits of their labor. And of course, we have socialized medicine here, so it really works in the Canadian government's favor to be getting cheaper drugs that are exactly the same as the brand name drugs. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of sketchy, but yeah.
It is, but they do turn out it is an interesting conundrum to me, because like Big Pharma for sure has like all its issues. Like it's, I don't know, like I know a lot of people have criticisms of Big Pharma. Like there's I don't really know. Like I'm not an expert in what it is, but like it's they just make a shit ton of money, but they also spend a lot of money, right? Like to create a drug, it takes a lot of research and development and a lot of money to create a drug. So the generic drugs are great because we as consumers, and especially like the government who's paying for all of this money, all of these drugs, which is really us, we fund the government. But then by purchasing all these generic drugs, you disincentivize innovation within regular pharma or Big Pharma or whatever. So it's a constant battle. It's constant like weighing out and a trade-off between making new drugs, which obviously we want, and making affordable current drugs, which we also want.
Right.
So fight over that in the comments. I'd love that. There was a question, and basically what I was just talking about. That's like what the government kind of had to grapple with when making their like laws and regulations regarding generic drugs, etc. So anyway, when Barry and Joel graduated high school, they both went on to study at U of T. Barry enrolled in engineering physics, which he chose because he knew it to be the most difficult mathematics program. And Joel went into the humanities program, and he would go on to study law. And in Barry's final year, which was 1964, he graduated first in his class and won the highest award in his discipline.
Nice.
So Barry was basically a fucking genius. Like he is killing it. And it was, I had read that like in his first year, he was fourth in his class. In his second year, he was third. In the third year, he was second. And then in the fourth year, he was number one, like best in the class, which is like pretty insane.
Yeah.
Barry then went on to study astronautics, which do you know what astronautics is?
Do I know what it is?
Yeah.
Is it about being an astronaut?
It's the science of the construction and operation of vehicles for travel in space.
That's cool.
So he went to study astronautics and aeronautics, and aeronautics is the study of the science of flight. And he studied both of these at MIT in Boston. So during his second year at MIT, Barry ended up getting a call in the middle of the night. Lou had died suddenly of an aneurysm. And this was shocking and horrible news, but it was particularly awful because at the time, Lou's wife, Beverly, was suffering from terminal leukemia, and she would go on to die only a few months later, leaving their 4 boys, aged 3, 4, 5, and 7, orphaned.
That's really sad.
Now, I believe I read later that the wife, Beverly, she was not originally Jewish, but converted when she married Lou. And she stipulated in her final days that she wanted the children to be raised by Jewish people. So like she didn't want her own family adopting the boys, even though they were like, we'd be down.
What the hell?
Yeah, kind of random, but she was like super into them being Jewish.
Yeah, but like your family. Unless maybe her family was not cool though, and maybe that's why she said that, right?
It's possible, but she seemed to be like just super into the Jewish faith.
Yeah, people who convert are. I mean, you like have to be to convert.
Exactly. So fair
you gotta
enough.
like jump through hoops, you know?
Yeah, I heard it's not easy.
Mm-mm.
So the boys were adopted by a local couple. But some people felt that Barry should have dropped out of MIT to take care of the boys himself. I think he was like 22 at the time. And he was like, I just like, how would I do that? Like,
yeah, like he's 22. Yeah.
But there was some back and forth and some people who were like, Barry should have done it.
Okay.
So after Lou died, Barry tried to buy out the two Winter companies. So they were put under the companies. So the inheritance and estate of Lou and Beverly Winters was put in a trust for the boys. So like everything was handled for them because they were so young or whatever. And so Barry was like, okay, how about I'll like buy out the company. And he wanted to be put in charge as manager of the Winter assets to, quote, protect the value of the assets for the children of Lewis and Beverly Winter, end quote.
Okay.
But the Royal Trust Company, who had been put in charge of the estate, refused the offer. So Barry was like, all right. So he instead went back to Boston, finished at MIT, earned himself a Master of Science degree in aeronautics and a doctorate in philosophy in systems engineering.
Okay.
And he ended with a perfect 5.0 GPA. This man's a friggin' genius.
Yeah, I didn't even know you could get a 5.0. I thought 4.0 was the best.
That's what it said. So Barry made his way back to Canada in 1967, and this was a couple years later. And at that time, Barry went to go visit the Winter companies to see what was up.
Okay.
And he was very upset with what he found. There was a new guy in charge, and he was making decisions that Barry felt would drive the company straight into the ground. So he was not pleased. Barry decided to make another offer, this time with his friend Joel. They both borrowed large sums of money from their parents and offered $450,000. But they would assume the company's $200,000 of debt, making the payout to the trust $250,000. The extra stipulation that Barry put in place to seal the deal was that each of the four cousins would be able to one day work at the company if they so chose, and that each of them would have the right to purchase 5% of the company's shares after working at the company for 2 years, provided certain conditions were met. With these details in place, Royal Trust agreed to the sale. Only a few years after the initial takeover, Sherman and Ulster had taken Empire from $800,000 in yearly sales to $2 million. So they were killing it. Soon, an American company, ICN, which stood for International Chemical and Nuclear Corporation, came sniffing around looking to buy Empire. They offered the men $2 million for the company.
Wow.
So Barry and Joel were intrigued by the offer, and after weighing everything out, they decided that they would sell. There was one part of the deal that Barry was not fond of, and that was a stipulation that shareholders at Empire would not be allowed to work in the generic business for at least 2 years. Sherman wanted to continue to work in what he knew, but what ICN was not aware of was that technically Barry and Joel were not shareholders. Instead, they each had their own holding companies that had shares in Sherman and Ulster Limited, who held the actual shares in Empire. Sherman withheld this information from ICN until the last possible moment, hoping that they wouldn't notice, and it turned out that worked.
Okay.
So I just included that because I think that's like kind of brilliant and sneaky, and just shows you that like he was a smart guy. He was like as fuck. So Barry remained working at Empire Laboratories after the takeover, but his strong personality and need for control got him fired almost immediately. And the person, I forget the person who actually fired him, but one of the people one of the big guys at ICN likes to brag that he was the only person who ever fired Barry Sherman. And it's true, it was the only person who ever fired Barry Sherman.
Okay.
In 1973, he started his own company called Sherman Technologies. And at first, he started providing equipment to other pharmaceutical companies, but soon it morphed back into a generic drug company, which would later be called Apotex. Now, Apotex is the company that he died leading. And Apotex went on to be extremely successful. Barry was a cutthroat businessman. He was creative and innovative, and he took huge risks. And the generic drug business is really no joke. There's a lot of competition. You have the government breathing down your neck at every turn, the brand name companies who have a vested interest in shutting you down. There's the whole legal aspect of it all. But Barry was determined to win at all costs, and he did.
Oh, okay.
Now, Barry spent a lot of time and money on litigation. He launched hundreds of lawsuits against competitors as well as against government regulators who made decisions that he disagreed with. He was constantly in court. This man was an absolute bulldog when it came to business, but Barry was not a mean man. He was extremely generous to those around him. He did a lot of charity work within the Jewish community and beyond, and he made a lot of financial donations, both openly and anonymously. And Honey as well. But Barry wasn't only generous with his money, he was very generous with his time and influence. He loved so much to see young people learn and succeed. He loved giving people opportunities. Many of his employees began as high school summer interns who he saw potential in. He loved giving advice to his friends' children and fostering business and entrepreneurship values in young people. It's like he really loved seeing other people do well. And particularly in business, it's like if anybody showed an interest at a young age of like wanting to start their own business, he was like ready to not only give them advice, but like fund it. Like he
sounds kind of cool.
And that was like, but the thing is like, that's all he did. So like, you know, it was really, really great if that's what you're into. But if you're like his kid who was like, I like dogs, he'd really be like, okay, I don't care, you know?
True.
So that's Barry. And that was like how he got to where he got to. And I think it's really important to get really in depth into these people because that's how you can try to figure out who the fuck killed them, since we don't know who killed them.
Ugh.
So Honey Sherman was born Anna Reich in a displaced persons camp in Austria in 1947. I cannot figure out why her nickname became Honey. I kept looking for it, can't find it. But anyway, these camps had been set up to house victims of World War II. Mm-hmm. Anna's parents were Naftuli and Helen Reich, and they had been freed by Allied forces from a Nazi work camp in Poland.
Wow.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
The Reichs would then immigrate to Canada and ended up in Toronto, where their second daughter, Mary, was born. The Reichs opened a small shoe store around Dundas and Keele, the area that is now known as the Junction. Yep. They also took in multiple boarders to make extra money, like Sherman's mother did. And she described, I think it might have been her, I think, Honey, actually describing, like, there were so many boarders in their house, like, it was divided into so many sections. She's like, our bedrooms, I didn't realize that until I got a little bit older, but like, we lived in the hallway. Like, that was their living situation because they had like every inch of the place was taken up by people. Now, the Reichs were not wealthy by any means, but they worked hard and they made a decent living for themselves. They lived just north of their shoe store in a predominantly Jewish area known as Bathurst Manor. Mm-hmm. And again, they took in boarders, whatever. Now, Honey's best friend, Bryna, described Honey in high school as outgoing, always down for an adventure, ready to try new things. But this girl was always late, always. And that continued into adulthood. Bryna made a habit of always picking Honey up at her place, or else she would be waiting around for her all day. And usually when she arrived, Honey would just be getting out of bed. But once she was up, she was ready to take on the day, ready to go try new things and go get it. Now, Honey and Bryna both decided to study teaching in university. Honey ended up at U of T, and during one summer, she got a job as it's a candy striper, right? That was those like old jobs at hospitals. When I read
where you like go in to cheer people up.
Yeah, but I think that's what it is. But I always whenever I read that, I'm always like, stripper at a hospital? What?
It's definitely not that.
But just when you read it, it's just
imagine.
Like, well, yeah, I don't know. But so she was working at Mount Sinai, which is a very big downtown hospital. And that was where she met Cindy Ulster. And she was married to Joel Ulster, who had just purchased a generic company with another guy by the name of Barry Sherman. Mm-hmm. So that is how Honey and Barry met each other, through Cindy and Joel, and they all became good friends. Now, when Honey and Barry got together, it didn't seem like a super falling in love type situation. It was more that they liked each other and got along, and they were each the type of person that the other one was looking for, and it kind of all worked out.
Okay.
And for the most part, they appeared to be a pretty good match, and they were super happy together and had a successful marriage and very successful life.
Yeah, definitely.
But Barry would go on to spend the majority of their marriage working, and Honey would take over all the philanthropic ventures. And they were very generous with their wealth. They contributed to many charities, mostly Jewish, but not exclusively. And they, Barry would talk extensively about how important it was to as a wealthy person, to donate money. And it's so funny because he was a liberal. He was a big donor of the Liberal Party, and really believed in charity and donating and funding welfare stuff or whatever, but he hated paying taxes, and would go on and on and on about taxes and how he didn't want to pay taxes and trying to get out of paying taxes and stuff. And it's why are you liberal?
Yeah, weird.
Weird
and you donate, so same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Well, I would say that the argument could be that if you don't think that the government is spending the money efficiently, and if you think the charity or wherever you're giving your money is spending the money more efficiently, maybe that's it. I don't know, but anyway. So back to the murders.
God, okay, let's hear it.
So a story had already appeared in the Toronto Sun, another popular Toronto newspaper, which some people call a tabloid, suggesting that this may have been a murder-suicide. So how did this theory come to be? A murder-suicide, you ask? Well, a journalist from the Sun was about to publish a story on the Shermans and got a last-minute word from a police source about the belts being found around their necks.
Okay.
And the comments from the police about them not looking for any suspects was enough to start that rumor. And unfortunately, the murder-suicide theory was kind of what police started going with after that, and it seemed to really cloud the whole investigation. So I'll go on a little bit about the crime scene here.
Okay. So, tell me.
Excuse me. The Shermans were found in their basement pool room. They were fully clothed and definitely appeared to have been placed in a specific manner. One thing that was noticed right away is that they appeared to have been placed in a position that was eerily similar to an art piece that the Shermans had on display in their home.
Ooh, eerie. You haven't seen photos of the crime scene, have you?
No, those are not made available. And unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is not.
They're probably on Reddit.
It's possible. It's possible. Let me know.
That crime scene Reddit. I'm not going back there.
No, that's fair enough. I don't really want to go there. So that's the statue. Now, this art piece was a life-size sculpture.
That's creepy. Why would you want that in your house? That's a creepy statue.
It is, but it's way more creepy after the fact, right?
It's still creepy.
It's a life-size sculpture.
They look like mannequins. Nothing's as scary as mannequins.
That is true. I would not want mannequins in my home. Hello, Herr Baumeister.
Yeah.
If we recall. So it's a life-size sculpture of two individuals, a man and a woman, made from a bunch of very colorful pieces of junk and trash or whatever.
Right.
The man
have weird taste in art.
It's true. This would not be my idea of. I wouldn't want it.
No,
it's not my taste. It's not my taste.
Yeah. Same.
But they had it, and it's just weird how they were placed basically like the mannequins. And
that is weird. That's really weird. That's got to be a coincidence. That's not a coincidence.
No, their legs are bent because of what they're sitting on. I think the mannequins, but other than that, it's a man and woman seated side by side. Their legs stretch out in front of them, and the man has his legs crossed over the other, just like Barry, and the woman doesn't.
I actually hate that.
It's creepy, right?
Super creepy.
We don't have a lot of information about the statue other than it was made in the 1970s and was given to the Shermans as a gift. And that piece had been on display in their home since it was built in 1985. Now, there's also a lot of interest in where Honey's cell phone was found, because that was the phone that was found inside the powder room on the floor.
Yeah.
And friends and family said that Honey never really used that bathroom. It was clearly like a guest bathroom. It's a powder room. So one theory was that Honey was trying to escape her attacker or attackers and hid in the powder room attempting to call somebody, but was apprehended before she was able to do so. And that seems like a pretty logical explanation to me.
Yep.
There were also the papers that were found on the ground. Then they were clearly Barry's papers just outside the pool room. So that suggests that that could have been where he was attacked. And he was like holding the papers. There was no signs of forced entry, but there was a basement window that was left open to air out a room that had just been painted. And I think there was also some talk of like people had been breaking in the neighborhood. And I think somebody had broken into their home once before. Just as a side note.
Hate that.
So on December 16th, 2017, their autopsies were done. And Dr. Michael Pickup was the pathologist assigned to the Sherman's autopsies. He had also been on scene at the Sherman home. So upon looking at the bodies, there was much to note. First, Barry's hyoid bone was intact, and I will get to the implications of that in a minute.
Okay.
There were also abrasions around Barry's wrists, indicating that his wrists had probably been bound at some point. Honey had injuries to her face. There were abrasions, but no bruising. And this indicated that she had died immediately after the injuries occurred, or possibly they were made post-mortem, because bruises require blood circulation to form. I did not know that, and that's fascinating.
I didn't know that, yeah.
And it makes sense. Dr. Pickup could not tell how the injuries were made or with what. Now, Honey's hyoid bone was also intact. Now, the thinking by Dr. Pickup at the time was this. So the hyoid bone is a bone in the throat, and it is often broken with sudden or violent strangulation cases. It is not generally broken in cases of suicide where the person slowly falls into a hanging position, but more in the cases where, like, if you recall, like a hanging where they like kick the box out from under and it's quickly, that would be a hyoid bone break.
Okay.
However, there is some disagreement within forensic pathology regarding the hyoid bone. Some believe that to make a ruling of murder by strangulation, the hyoid bone must be broken. But there have been studies more recently that show the hyoid bone, and it's a really hard word to say, the hyoid bones were only broken in 1/3 of homicide by strangulation cases. In the other 2/3 of the cases, the hyoid bone remained intact, and this was due to several factors, including the amount of pressure used on the neck, the condition of the hyoid bone to begin with, and the type of ligature used. For example, a softer ligature, i.e. a belt, and is less like it. There's a less likely case that the hyoid bone would break. Also, age seemed to play some sort of factor. It seemed that the older the person was, the more likely the hyoid bone would be broken in a case of strangulation. Now, this information really just seemed to add more confusion to the case, if anything. But it did make it harder to say anything with certainty. So, but interesting. Now, Dr. Pickup determined that the Shermans had died of ligature compression, which led to strangulation, although it was not clear how forcibly this was done or with what. It seemed logical that the belts around their necks would have been the most likely cause, but it also could have been done for display purposes because clearly they were displayed. They clearly had their hands tied at some point with something, and that was gone now. So clearly they had been maybe like tied up and murdered and then set to be where they were.
So creepy.
Yeah, they were very purposely placed in that position.
Yeah.
Which is just so creepy.
It really is. This actually really is similar to the Herb Baumeister pool room.
It is. Actually, I never even thought about that. But yeah, it actually is.
Oh.
Ew, I don't want a pool room in my basement.
No way. Never after this.
Hell no. So these findings did not rule out the murder-suicide theory, but it did not point to it directly either. When family and friends of the Shermans heard about this murder-suicide theory, they were appalled and nobody bought it. It seemed completely out of character and just no one was into it.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of hindered this investigation was that around this time, there was a huge break in the Bruce MacArthur case, which occupied a huge number of Toronto's best homicide detectives.
Okay.
So for anyone who doesn't know who Bruce MacArthur he's alive. He was a serial killer, running rampant in the gay community, killing gay guys who were generally closeted gays.
Yeah. That was a crazy case.
Burying them in some poor lady's yard.
And he just wasn't suspected because he was like this like unassuming kind of guy.
Yeah, and there's a number of things, and we could do that case too. It's a very interesting one. Very modern serial killer.
More local Toronto.
Yeah, but anywho, yeah, a lot of the police were like focused on that.
Place. Yeah.
Toronto has a lot of shit.
Like, what's up with that?
It's fine. So okay. Barry and Honey's 4 adult children were Lauren, Jonathan, Alexandra, and Kaylin. And they began to gather along with other friends and family, like the day that they found out at someone's house, and to figure what was going on. The kids were all grown, but all of them to varying degrees were still very spoiled by their father. He bought them all homes, some of them more than one, paid for cars, trips, pretty much anything they asked for. And all of them were due to inherit Barry and Honey's over $4 billion estate.
$4 billion.
Well, and there's speculation because nobody really knows how much he was worth. They know like the 4 to 5, it's like 4 to 5 billion that they were assuming, but that was based off the Apotex, his company. But he had so much invested in other places that some people say could have been as much as, what did somebody say? Like 10 or even more.
The area they lived in, it's definitely like upscale area, I would say. Oh no, their house was worth like however many million. So it was definitely.
And they were in the middle of selling that house to move to, I think they were moving to Forest Hill to like build their own house that was going to be like even bigger. And
see, that's the thing, because the area they were living in, it sounds like they were in like a more expensive pocket of that area, but it's not like, if you're somebody in Toronto who has that amount of wealth, I wouldn't say that's the area for that.
Well, so they built the house. They built it in 1985. So they had been living there for a long time, and they built it like custom, and it was like very big. It had tennis courts. It had a pool in the basement. So like they built it to be custom, and like it was, there's some houses in the neighborhood, I'm sure they're probably like less intense and like cheaper, but this one was like had all their shit. But also Honey and Barry, and we'll get to it probably in a little bit, but like they were super loaded, and like they took lavish vacations and like paid a lot for their like healthcare and stuff like that, but they were not super materialistic for their level of wealth.
Yes, that makes sense then, because like most people who would buy a house in that area and have as nice of a house as them, which is still like obviously extremely expensive, it's not billionaire level, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think they definitely bought it and made it probably before they were at billionaire level, but then like didn't move because like they both drove.
Yes, they were relatively frugal, like considering.
Yeah, for their level of wealth. Like they each had like, she had a Lexus car that she had for 10 years.
Nice car, but
like it was 10 years old, and like she just kept getting it maintained. Same with Barry, like he'd had 4 cars over his life, and like he like kept it until it was like worn to the ground.
Right.
They both like, she was into like designer clothes and stuff, but like not, she was like a weird kind of like hoarder lady where she would like buy like, if she would go to like a designer place and like find something that was on sale and buy like 7 of them and then just keep them in her closet and never wear them.
I love hoarding.
It's like weird shit like that.
No, I totally get it. I fucking love hoarding.
Yeah, they just like were not they were not the level of materialism that they could have been for their wealth.
Yeah. They didn't come from money, right? So
no, neither of them.
So that could be part of it. I feel like it could go either way. Either like you get money and then you're just overspending, or you're like kind of staying. But it is interesting because like if he lived in, let's say, the Bridle Path, which is another area of Toronto, then everybody would know he's that rich,
Exactly.
So
Yeah. And I think to me, based on my research, it kind of seems like Barry was just like so preoccupied with his work. Like he just literally didn't care about anything else. And there were, and also like, he talked, it was friends of his talked about like, they would be like at a golf course or whatever. And like one of the, like, they'd be like, why don't you have a Rolex? And he'd be like, why would I buy a Rolex? That's a stupid way to spend money. And it's like, that would have been like literally nothing to him.
that's
And
interesting.
he like when it was they flew first class when they were flying like on long flights, but other than that they would fly economy, which like at that level like there's no reason to
you
ever
could probably have
fly
a jet.
economy.
Like
Exactly.
yeah.
So it wasn't like they were like acting poor or anything, but they acted like millionaires when really they were billionaires,
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah. So
I wonder why. I always wonder that too, because it's like what, like, when you die, like you're not going to have that money anymore. So like you billions of dollars, like that's more than you ever need in your life. Like,
well, a lot of it, like when somebody is a billionaire and they run a company, like a lot of their money is tied up in that company.
right.
So there's that. Two, I think also a lot of people who do go on to become billionaires, like you have to have a certain mindset in order to get to that level. And part of that is like for some people being frugal and like knowing how to work with money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like there's some people who it's like, from their personality, they could never be a billionaire because they would spend they don't know how to handle money. And like maybe I think in some cases if that's like hardwired in your personality. We were listening to a podcast recently, actually, Chris and I, it was one of his podcasts and we were in the car, and it was this like person who talked to people who like already had money and had issues. And so he was talking to this couple who the man had like made a shit ton of money. He was super loaded, multimillionaire, and he would never let his wife spend money on anything. And he was so insanely frugal. And so he was like talking him through, he's like, your wife wants to go on a vacation. Like she describes her dream vacation. She wants to go to like Italy and like go shopping and have dinners and whatever. And he's like to the husband, like, how much do you think this it's the most amount of money she could spend on this vacation? And he's like, okay, maybe 20 grand. He's like, you can make that back in 2 days. Let her go on the freaking vacation. Like, and she's like, this poor woman who's like, had a bunch of kids with him. She's just trying to like, she just wants a Peloton bike and like to like redo her front yard. And the guy's like such a stickler and has so much money. And it's like, dude, you're not going to let your wife buy an exercise bike? Are you insane? What's she going to do with this? Exercise for you.
Yeah.
So it was just it's like some people just have that mindset.
Psychological, yeah.
That they're like, well, it's stupid to spend money on no matter how rich you are. If it's a stupid thing.
I mean, I get a Rolex is like, yeah, you don't need a Rolex, but like an exercise bike, come on.
Yeah, like buy her a fucking Peloton.
Yeah.
To exercise on, you moron. Anyway, I digress. So, just also another side note. Honey and Barry had conceived their first baby, Lauren, on their own and had her successfully. But after her, Honey had a series of miscarriages. And after 9 years, so when Lauren was 9, they started to have their other 3 children using Barry's sperm and a surrogate, which was very uncommon at the time. It's not super relevant, but something
that's
to
interesting.
mention.
How old were they at that time? Do you know?
So at the time of the deaths, I have it written down later, but Lauren, I think, was 4. Where did I put it? Okay, Lauren was 43, Jonathan 34, Alexandra 32, and Kaylin 27.
And how old were they when they died?
Barry and Honey, I think they were 70 and 75. She was 70 and he was 75.
Okay.
Okay, so the immediate family got to speak to the detectives, but they were super unsatisfied with how the investigation was going. And we will get to that a little bit later. But they were not being dramatic. The police were really not doing their best work, and they opted to hire the family. And it's interesting too, because people are always like, it always seems that if it's like poor people, the police are going to do a shitty job.
Yeah, you'd think they'd care. It's rich white people.
You'd think they'd really care, but they were like not doing the best.
All right. Well, maybe they were anti-Semitic police.
possible, but I think the Bruce MacArthur thing was a big thing. It sounded like they were really in over their heads at this point.
I mean, like, Toronto seems like it's so fucked up. Like, guys, get it together. There's lots of crimes here.
I know. Maybe they need a bigger department if they can't handle two simultaneous
investigations. It seems like there's a lot of murders and like,
get it together, guys. It's not really good to hear that the police and the homicide unit in your city like can't handle two investigations.
That's not a good feeling.
Like, yikes.
Okay.
So this is not very doesn't shine a good light on them. Okay. So because they were not happy with how the investigation was going, and rightfully so, they went on to hire their own investigation team. So they hired a man named Tom Klatt, who was a 19-year veteran of the Toronto Police Force and an ex-homicide detective, and also one of Canada's top criminal lawyers named Brian Greenspan. Brian ordered second autopsies on Barry and Honey. He hired coroner Dr. Jim Carnes, and he was retired, but he was very happy to jump back onto the case, and he was to oversee things. And he hired Dr. David Shason, who would perform the actual autopsies. And you can see it was quite the team, but given who they were, money was no object, so they got to hire the best of the best. So Dr. Shason went on to perform these second autopsies. He had similar findings to Dr. Pickup. He did point out that after looking at the crime scene photos, that it would not have been possible for either Barry or Honey to have died by strangulation in the position that they were found in, or it would have been very hard. And he believed that there were not enough weight or downward force to cause the strangulation in that position. So
yeah, that makes sense though.
Yeah, because they're like sitting down and
they're sitting,
tied, right? So Shason hypothesized that the Shermans had both been murdered by persons unknown, probably a hit job, and that and then had been set up that the way that they were found.
Okay.
So he seemed to really not like the murder-suicide theory. And
I don't either.
I agree.
Yeah.
The day after the second autopsies, on Thursday, December 21st, 2017, a funeral was held for Barry and Honey Sherman, and it was attended by over 7,000 people, including John Tory, Mayor of Toronto, Kathleen Wynne, Premier of Ontario at the time, and Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. So like,
oh, Justin Trudeau.
It was a big deal, and like everyone was there. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the Toronto Homicide Division fails in this case, because it continued
tell us.
Do poor work. So the investigation carried on, but there were many criticisms aimed at the police, and truth be told, they seem more than fair. And they seem to really justify the Sherman children retaining their own private investigation team. Okay. So here's an unexhaustive list of things they fucked up on. First, police were aware of the second autopsy performed by Dr. Shason, but it took them 5 weeks to finally speak with him about his findings. And it's like, you don't want to know? You don't want to know?
Yeah. And also, what about the weird surveillance thing?
Well, that's in the list.
Okay.
There was no attempt to take fingerprints or DNA from people who frequented the Sherman house, which is a common thing to do so that you could see if there was anybody unknown fingerprint-wise or DNA-wise.
Yeah.
Many people close to the Shermans were not interviewed for months, and they were like, hey, why would you not interview me? Hello. Also,
I hate this.
The camera footage taken from, so there was camera footage taken from Apotex and from the couple across the street who had a clear view of the Sherman house, and they were not looked at for more than a month.
Dude, why? What were they doing? How long would it take to look at this?
And there was also there was a lockbox on the door because of the real estate showings. They didn't look in that box for 2 weeks to even see if it was there. And all these people are like, hey, we have footage. Hey. And they're like, oh, we'll get to it. And even with the couple.
What are you doing with your time?
It was like the couple, a police woman came weeks later to talk to them. And they're like, oh, did you look at the thing? And she's like, no, I haven't seen it yet. And then she started going on about how she had she couldn't find daycare for her kids and all this shit. And it's like, lady, people are dead. They're dead. Do your job.
Yeah.
Or what's going on?
Oh my God. Okay.
So the Sherman children were even like without they were upset with the investigation, but they didn't even know about all this shit until 6 weeks following Barry and Honey's deaths. And the police continued to work on the case with the idea of the murder-suicide. It was like
so
weeks
obviously
until
not
they
that.
dropped that theory.
But it's
So-
like clearly not that, right?
I know. I don't see any indication that it is that besides that, like and I understand why journalists would assume that, because the police were like, we're not looking for suspects at the time. Why would you not be looking for suspects at the time?
Look for some suspects, man.
That's your job. Look for the fucking suspects of the murder. So anyway, that's where I'm going to end part 1.
Oh my God.
We'll get to a lot more weird shit in part 2.
Okay. Oh, there's more weird shit.
Well, we'll get into all like my list of suspects.
Okay.
And most people's list of suspects.
All right.
So yeah. So any thoughts before we wrap
up? Give us a preview without spoiling anything. Do you have an idea of who you think it is?
I don't have any solid evidence pointing.
No, but do you have like an opinion?
I have a list of people, and one is I find extremely their behavior and what they have said has been very suspicious.
Okay.
And that that's interesting to me.
I'm interested to hear.
And there's also like I point out a couple people who have possible motive.
Right. Okay. I'm interested to hear those.
So there's that. So look forward to that next week.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. hello@whosknockingpodcast.com. Sorry, I always can't remember anything. That's our email address. Give us a shout. Give us suggestions for our 50th episode coming up.
What would you like to hear?
Then Instagram, Who's Knocking Podcast. Twitter, Who's Knocking Pod. Give us a shout. Say hi. And that's all. So stay safe, because you never know
who's knocking.
This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.